Ok, allora io inizio. Intanto grazie per essere venuti, lo so che è una giornata molto calda, adesso devo di cosa arrivare fino qua, quindi grazie mille, soprattutto per Doug che è venuto da molto lontano, quindi è sicuramente piacevole per lui vedere tutte queste belle persone. Questo evento di stasera si inserisce all'interno di un percorso che arriverà ad ottobre con una conferenza che si chiama Intersection, che vuole mettere insieme il mondo dello sviluppo con il mondo della UX. Vi faccio vedere un piccolissimo video di presentazione super corto che riassume un po' i valori della conferenza, così che possiate. Non so se funziona l'audio, forse no.
Sei a schermo? Non sei a schermo?
Ah no? Scusate, spero di sì. No, si è spoilerato tutto.
Adesso c'è un video.
Per fortuna abbiamo solo visto.
Sì, no, vabbè. Insomma, è una roba veramente
Ok, cosa che devi sapere? Adesso sto facendo streaming. C'è online, quindi se vogliono il link c'è da qualche parte sul canale di video, si vede. Ok, sta andando, quindi finché va qua tutto bene. Questo è l'audio. Se vedi che non arriva bene, quando va.
Va, ma sta prendendo questo microfono. Se lo vuoi ricordare.
Allora, diciamo che questi sono un po' i valori che vogliamo portare avanti, quindi sicuramente una voglia di trovare insieme alla parte di sviluppo anche, io parlo della parte di sviluppo perché io sono una UX designer, non l'ho detto, quindi ovviamente dal mio punto di vista è praticamente una vita che cerco di trovare il modo migliore per lavorare con i miei colleghi e sono stata abbastanza fortunata, devo dire, a trovare quasi sempre dall'altra parte persone che sono state molto collaborative. Però ovviamente in questo percorso ho anche visto quali possono essere le problematiche e ho visto che non è tra l'altro un problema solo mio o dei colleghi con cui ho lavorato, ma è una cosa un pochino più ampia e lo dimostrano appunto anche gli speaker che appunto avremo con noi, che sono tutte persone molto conosciute nel settore e che sentono molto questi temi. Quindi verranno ovviamente a parlare di come collaborare meglio insieme, ma anche di loro esperienze personali strettamente lavorativo anche all'estero, perché per esempio come Anil che lavora con voice, quindi con Alexa per esempio, che viene dall'India ma adesso lavora a Berlino, quindi ci racconterà un pochino di come è anche la differenza rispetto al mondo asiatico e a quello europeo. Per cui insomma penso che sarà una cosa molto, molto interessante e questa sera abbiamo qua Doug che aprirà la strada con un bellissimo talk che ora inizierà appunto a presentarci. Non so se qualcuno di voi di Bildo però vuole dire qualcosa perché stasera ci ospitano loro.
Ah sì, molto velocemente,
quindi...
giusto due parole. Noi siamo Bildo, cioè questa cosa qui, io in particolare sono Bildo da veramente molto poco, eppure mi hanno fatto fare questa cosa, per cui sono un bel posto in cui venire. Stiamo assumendo, quindi nel caso se volete andare sul nostro sito, mandare una mail qua, tutto molto benvenuto. E niente, tutto passa. Lascio la parola a Dani.
Non ho detto il talk sarà in inglese, scusate, perché lui appunto viene da Seattle, ma vabbè, penso che non ci siano problemi. Se qualcuno vuole fare delle domande, ha dei problemi a farlo in inglese, possiamo tradurre senza problemi. So, here it is. Doug, it's your turn.
Thank you. Thank you. So thank you everyone for coming out and having me. I appreciate it. As Alessandro said, I'm from Seattle originally. I'm spending the summer in Dublin with my family, and we're hoping to stay in the EU for some time because we're enjoying it and having a great time. So I'm going to talk today, and this is actually great, the intersection of UX and development, because I'm going to talk about images and images on websites, and I talk a lot about native apps as well, and how to deliver beautiful images, which is an important part of the user experience, but in a way that's fast, because that's another important part of the user experience. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how performance comes into that. And so, who am I? I'm a Google developer expert. I've been doing web performance for about 8 years. I used to work for AT&T in America. I do developer relations, I look at performance of websites and native apps, and I lead workshops and give talks on images and video, kind of like I am today. I'm going to post the slides online and put them on the meetup later tonight when I get back to my apartment. And they'll be down there at SlideShare/Doug Sillers. But before we start talking about images, I'm going to show a pretty image, but how many of you sort of get a feeling in the pit of your stomach when you think about walking on this walkway out in the middle of the Alps, like nailed on the side of a mountain, right? I see a lot of smiles. It's a little terrifying. People are a little worried, scared of heights. Totally understandable. My 6-year-old jumped on the whole thing, so it rattled as we walked across it. She thought that was hilarious. But Ericsson did a study where they put sensors on people's heads to measure stress responses to different activities, and they found that standing in line is a stressful experience. They found that standing on the edge of a cliff raises your anxiety and your stress levels, but they actually found that slow mobile experiences are more stressful than standing on the edge of a cliff. And so that feeling you got of unease when you were thinking about standing on an edge of a cliff is what our customers feel when your website or your app is slow. And so we're going to walk through ways to avoid this as things go on. But there's a lot more data. Google found that a 3-second delay on a website causes 53% of your users to go away. Adding a half-second delay increased frustration and lowered engagement. Amazon and Walmart have found that 100 milliseconds lowers how much money they make on their website, and that's desktop data, that's not mobile. And then my favorite study is 4% of mobile users admit to throwing their phone when a website is slow. And so when you see someone on the bus or on the tram with a broken phone, it might be because of a website that you were working on, and so we want to avoid that. So what can we do to make websites and apps faster? If we look at the data of what web pages are made of, half of the kilobytes sent down on a web page are images. So if we can reduce the size of the images, we'll reduce half of the payload delivered on your website. So let's look at different ways that we can reduce the size of the images on the web. So what I use for the analysis is a tool called Web Page Test. It's a performance tool, it's free, and it's open source, and it's great. You can test on mobile devices, you can test on every single type of browser. They have them set up all around the world, so you can see what your web page loads in Singapore, and they just launched one in Turkey today, I think, so you can see how your page loads in Turkey, Singapore, Hong Kong, the United States, in Europe, everywhere. Lighthouse, which is in Chrome DevTools, but also part of Web Page Test, another tool that measures performance of web pages. Both are run by people at Google, but they're free and open source. And then finally, there's a tool called the HTTP Archive, and what that does is every 2 weeks, it crawls 500,000 websites, both on mobile and on desktop, so you can see what all the other web pages are doing. And they use Web Page Test and Lighthouse to gather the results. So it's performance data on how different web pages are working. And it's jumping to 1.5 million websites every 2 weeks, like this month. They tried for July 1st and it didn't work. But when we look at Lighthouse has a lot of different optimizations to speed up web pages, but 4 of them are images. Oh, no worries. And 4 of them are about images, and so I'm going to talk about those 4. It's image quality, image format, the sizing of the images, and lazy loading of the images. And when you run a Lighthouse test, which you can do in Chrome DevTools or with Web Page Test, you get graded, you get 0 to 100, where 0 is bad and 100 is good. And so we all are hoping for the green, but unfortunately a lot of websites are still down at the 0. So let's start at image quality, and what can we do for image quality? You may recognize this in preview on your Mac, and as you lower the quality, you'll see that the size of the image gets smaller and smaller. Unfortunately, the quality of the image gets smaller too, right? What we're doing is removing pixels, and it starts to look jaggy. And we don't want it to look jaggy, but we want to lower the quality. So we want to find that sweet spot in the middle where quality and we lower the quality enough so that the human eye can't tell the difference. Lighthouse recommends that you use 85% quality on all images. 85% is kind of a funny number because if you use different tools, 85% means different things in every single tool. It's a subjective number and nobody uses the same scale. But you know, it's really easy with a tool like ImageMagick. You just set the quality to 85 and it makes a new image. There's a tool, it's a web-based cloud tool where you upload the image, and then in the URL you can just change the quality to 85, and on the fly it will create a quality 85 image with that URL and show up on your web page, which is really cool. We can look to see how image quality is being used. And what we find on the web today is that 33% of the internet is not using 85% image quality at all. So unoptimized images. About almost half, 43% is doing a good job of this. But as you can see, over 50% of the web has room for improvement on optimizing the image quality. For those sites that got a 0, that 1/3 of the internet that got a 0, the median savings is a 2.8 second faster load time on a mobile device. 2.8 seconds is really fast. That's a huge improvement. The percent savings would obviously be bigger on slower network conditions. I just spent a month in West Cork, Ireland, where my Airbnb said that it had Wi-Fi, but didn't tell us that it was connected to a 3G router that was really on 2G most of the time. And my children didn't really understand, like, but Dad, I've got Wi-Fi. And it's like, but it's connected to nothing. It was interesting. It was really great. At 1 o'clock in the morning, it got really fast because everybody's phone went to sleep. And so if I needed to work, I'd take a nap and then I could work from like 1 until 7 in the morning because everybody's phone was asleep and the cellular was super fast. But you can also see that these pages would save about 400 kilobytes. And that's just the median page. So there's a lot of potential improvement just by using image quality. And so I've got some examples here. This is Mizenhead Lighthouse in West Cork, Ireland. This is the southwestest most part of Ireland. Like, the next thing you see is Canada if you're on a boat. And so this image was 2.8 megabytes. I took it on my phone. If I save it at 85% quality, I save over 50% of the bytes. Just like that, super fast. Super easy. You can't tell any difference, the image still looks great, but what if we go to a little bit lower quality? Can we maybe save a little bit more data so it downloads even faster? 1.3 megabytes on a mobile phone is still gonna take a while, right? 50%, it's, again, we've more than half, again, smaller, but you can start to see that it's, maybe you can't, but it doesn't look great. If I go to 20%, you can actually see the pixelation up in the clouds, like it looks horrible. You would never want to serve that image on the web, right? It looks really bad. I mean, 274 kilobytes, that's really great, but you know, the quality just isn't there. That's not what we want to serve to our customers. But if we look at it, you know, 85% is already saving us more than 50% of the bytes, just like that. So that's great. We know that, whoops, I went click too fast. All right, we know that that one is bad, but where's the sweet spot in the middle? Is it 50%? Is it somewhere in the middle? We don't want to have to do this subjectively with our eyes. We won't do a good job with our eyes doing this over and over again. Luckily, there's software that will do this for us. Google has a tool called Ugly. I think I'm pronouncing that right. They're all of the compression engineers for Google are in Switzerland, and they name everything after pastries. So Ugly is a type of pastry. You can also use structural similarity. And so this is a tool that does structural similarity, and it just goes back and forth and finds the optimal savings. Cloudinary, again, remember I showed Q85. If you just put Q auto, it determines the optimal quality on the fly. So it does structural similarity, and what that's doing is it's saying, what's the lowest quality that I can lower it to before the human eye can't tell a difference? And what we find is when we do that, we've dropped down to between 600 and 900 kilobytes, depending on the tool. So we've saved another half, right? We're down here, not quite 50, but you know, maybe 55% quality, squeezing all of that out where the customers can't, where your users can't even tell a difference, so this is worth it. If I run these, if I build a web page and I run it in web page test, we can see how long it takes those pages to load. I'm using a mobile device. I'm using a Moto G4 in Virginia because they have actual Moto devices in the United States that you can test on. And you can see that the load time goes from 17 seconds down to under 7 seconds. So we've really sped up the load time just for one image, 2.8 megabytes to 600 kilobytes. Yeah, that's a pretty big savings. But we can combine this optimization with the next one on the list, which is the image format. And so image format is, we're going to talk about the different image formats that are out there. The most common one that we all know and love is the JPEG, right? It's been around since the 90s, and it's ubiquitous across the web. Let's talk really quickly on this as a side note about SVG vector graphics. Scalable vector graphics are great because they're drawn as shapes and they're infinitely scalable. And they're just stored as XML. They're text files, essentially. So you can put them right in line into the HTML. And so if you have the Twitter icon, that's the same Twitter icon, and you can just stretch it as much as you want. If it looks pixelated, that's because PowerPoint doesn't support SVGs, and I had to paste in anyway, PowerPoint. But they're really great. Here's an SVG that I found live on a website in Brazil. You may recognize the company that they're linking to, right? It's the Facebook logo, but they made a mistake with this vector graphic. And so you can open up the XML, right? It's XML, and I enlarged it, but basically they saved it in Illustrator. They were using Illustrator to build it. But if you look at the little scroll bar right there, you can see that there's a lot of Illustrator stuff added to the bottom of this XML. In fact, Illustrator added about 1.3 megabytes of extra stuff to this image. And so when I opened it up and then I fixed it by just selecting and deleting it and resaving, I got it to 900 bytes. That's like 99.7% savings just because Illustrator screws up. And then you can gzip it, which is, again, about half, or Brotli, which is another compression algorithm. Again, Brotli is bread because it's Google and Switzerland, right? It's a text compression, and it goes down to 440 bytes. So from 1.3 megabytes to 440 bytes. And on the website, it looks exactly the same. So they were doing the right thing by trying to build an SVG, but then they pushed it live and didn't test. So, test, I guess is the moral of that story. They have 5 SVGs that they did incorrectly on the website. So there's like 5 megabytes, maybe 6 megabytes of just stuff that doesn't need to be there, slowing down the web page and aggravating the customers. But I'd like to talk a little bit about WebP. And if you look here, the average WebP image is about half the size of JPEG. And WebP it's a Google format. It's more modern. JPEGs are from the 90s. WebP is about 5 years old. So it's got better algorithms for the compression. And so it's really easy to create, using ImageMagick, you can convert it. Using Cloudinary, I just set format to auto, and if I'm on Chrome, it will make it, it'll automatically create a WebP file for me. And when I turn this image into WebP, remember it was like 600 to 900, now we're 400 to 500. So we've, again, maybe not half, but another, 30 or 40% cut out. And now, if you were building a web page, you could say load the WebP first for the devices that support WebP. If it doesn't support WebP, you can say use the JPEG as a fallback. And the WebP, you can see we've shaved off another 600 milliseconds of load time, another 200 kilobytes, right? It's a significant savings. Now, you're probably thinking WebP, that's Google. And if you look at can I use it, it is Google. It's only supported today in Chrome and in Android. That does get you 74% of the web, which is, that's pretty good, but it's not everybody. But what's really interesting is if you read the notes, it's in development in Edge, and I believe it's coming out in one of the next releases. I just saw a tweet this morning, but I didn't have time to follow up to see if that's really true. And Safari and Firefox are experimenting with WebP. So it could be by the end of the year that all major modern browsers will support WebP, which would be it'd make it a lot easier for us who want to serve small images. We could switch our format to WebP and support many, many of our web users with this format. if we look at how it's being used on the web with the HTTP archive, we can see that a full 2/3 of the web are not doing this at all. They're just using JPEGs. They're not doing any WebP. And if those images were switched for that 2/3 of the web, the median web page would get about 4 seconds faster and lose about 600 kilobytes of weight. So 4 seconds load time faster, that's a huge improvement in load time. The last one I'm going to talk about really quickly is image sizing. So this is a cathedral in Serbia. I took this photo. And it's a 13 megapixel, because I took it with my smartphone, 1.6 megabytes. When I do all the optimizations I talked about earlier, I get it down to 800 kilobytes. But the problem is, it's still 13 megapixels. And if you download it onto a phone, say it's 800 by 600, you end up throwing away 12.5 megapixels of data, right? You're throwing away 95% of the data. And if you think about that, you're downloading 800 kilobytes, and then you're throwing away 725 of those kilobytes. And what happens is the phone has to fire up, and the CPU has to go and think about which ones to throw away. So if your users are on a low-powered phone, that will take time. So it's going to take a long time to download it, and then take a long time to do the analysis to put that up on there. And the closest analogy I can think of is when you order something from Amazon, and it's like 2 pencils, and you get this giant box with like 15 meters of brown paper that you have to go through before you find the 2 pencils in the bottom of the box. And that's what we're doing with our images, and so we shouldn't do that. Now, sizing images for mobile devices is hard because these are the Android devices that hit the internet in one day about Christmas time last year. And so the size of the box is how many devices of that device type. So these are all Samsung S7s and S8s. The color is it a fast device or a slow device? So you can see there are a lot of fast devices, but then as you get down here, there are a lot of very slow devices that there are not a lot of users. I believe there's 6,600 different device types that are just Android that hit the web in one day. And you sort of go down to the event horizon down in the corner, and you can see there's just like thousands of devices, all different sizes and different speeds. And so how do you size images properly for that? And what the web has come up with is responsive images. And so the idea of responsive images is you generate a set of different images that are 25 kilobytes different in size. And so I used a tool that generated a bunch of different sizes. I picked one, and now I'm only throwing away 106,000 pixels, right? So 16% as opposed to like thousands and thousands of percent. And the tool I use is called responsive breakpoints. And so I said, generate a bunch of images between 200 and 1400 pixels wide, 25 kilobytes apart, make 20 images, and go, and it generates it for me. This tool is open source, so you can make it part of your tool chain. Every time you upload images, it does it for you automatically. There are a bunch of tools that do things like this for you. And what you get, this is the source code. And rather than look at the source code, we're going to do a demo, because demos are more fun. This is the web page I was just showing you the code for. And when I resize this screen, different images are going to download that are appropriately sized for the width of the screen. But so you can see that the different images are loaded. It's going to go from sepia to full color to sepia to full color. So you'll see that a new image is downloaded as I resize the screen. And so once I get to 1400, it starts changing really quickly because, as you might imagine, cutting off just a small sliver of, when it's an image this big, it's very easy to shave off 25 kilobytes. So you see a lot of changes really quickly just in this little frame right here. But then you can see all the way down to, for a really, really small mobile device, the image will be perfectly sized for the device without wasting extra pixels or kilobytes for the end user. And you can actually see, I did this all with Cloudinary because it's a simple tool for demos. But you can see I just set the width parameter in the URL, and it generates it on the fly. And if you look carefully, every other one has the sepia tag, which is making it sepia. So it's generating that in the cloud in this cloud-based tool. So that's kind of fun.
Sorry, Doug.
Yeah.
Just a question.
Yeah.
In this example, you had already downloaded all the images, of course, because I've seen no Flickr or
It's pretty quick.
anything.
It's pretty quick. We'll open up DevTools and turn off the cache. I did download them earlier just because it was a live demo.
All right.
Right?
So there might be a little Flickr in between.
Yeah, let me reload the page and then oh, it's on. Let's turn that off. All right, full size.
All right.
It's still pretty quick.
Yeah, it's nice.
And this is all dependent on the speed of the Wi-Fi and everything as well. Yeah, so it's pretty quick. I have already downloaded them, and so they're already. Cloudinary uses a CDN, so it's already on the CDN somewhere here in Europe. So it was just coming from Akamai somewhere nearby. But yeah, it is downloading them. It wasn't generating them on the fly for that part of the test because I've already built them. All right, and that's my video in case it doesn't work. But what's great here is, when I was serving the full-size image, it was in this case it was a megabyte. And when I go down to responsive for a mobile device, it's now serving the right size image for that device. It's now down to, 121 kilobytes. I just shaved off 5 seconds off the load time. So that's huge. So you can see that was a big jump there to really speed up the delivery of the image. And so those images are optimized with every single optimization that I've talked about so far. If you're building a web page like this and you want to support WebP and you want to support JPEG, you can build a list of your WebP images and a list of your JPEGs. And the browser will come through and pick the first image that it can use. So it'll try the WebPs and the right size of WebP. If it can't do WebP, it'll fall back to JPEG. You can imagine that this gets really big in your HTML. But it works and it does the job correctly. And really it's just a few hundred bytes and you're going to save hundreds of kilobytes on the image. So it's totally worth doing. Again, Chrome only for right now, but there's a thing called client hints where you can actually tell the server the size of the screen. And then your server knows, oh, the viewport is 1,000 pixels wide. I can serve a width, and in this case, the auto width, so it's serving down 1,000 pixels wide and it serves the right image. And what that does is it keeps your code, one image, just a couple lines as opposed to that. But again, right now this is in W3C, but it's only implemented in Chrome, so it's Google only again, unfortunately. However, responsive images are used a lot. Almost 60% of the web is doing this correctly. And this is sort of the mobile first move. Everyone went mobile first and they resized the images so that it would work well on mobile devices. But for the 22% that aren't doing this, we're looking again at 400 kilobytes of savings, about 2.7 seconds faster load time on 3G. So pretty huge potential savings there. And so the first three optimizations I've talked about, image format, image sizing, and image quality, are just about one specific image, which is great if you have a website that has just one image on it. Most websites have 2, or maybe 3 or 4 images on them. And so the last optimization in Lighthouse is lazy loading. And what lazy loading is it basically is not loading the pictures that aren't on the screen. And so there was a study done where they were looking at how people use the web on the desktop. And they found that 57% of people never scroll beyond what's in the initial viewport on the screen. They don't scroll below the fold. 17% look at the second screen, and it gets lower and lower the longer your page is, and people just don't scroll down. So if you have a web page that looks like this, you have 7 images on the web page, you could get away without loading those 4 below the screen. That's going to really speed up the initial load time of the web page. What we find, HTTP archive again, 60% of the web is not doing any lazy loading at all. If we do lazy loading, potential savings of 3.5 seconds, 500 kilobytes for the median page. Again, huge savings. So what do we do? Here I've just got a green box at the bottom of the page, instead of that. That's sort of the idea of preview images. So if you're on Android and you do an image search for cats in costume, you'll see that there are these placeholder images that are sort of the color, right? The alligator cat is green, the pumpkin cat is orange or whatever. And this is, Facebook does this, Medium does this, lots of websites are doing this. And it's a great way so people know that an image is coming, but also it doesn't cause the page to change the layout, like when you're reading an article and the images pop in and then the text moves around and it's very hard to read. If you want to go fancy, this is an SVG, so a vector graphic, sort of showing this waterfall. And so you can sort of see there's light areas where the waterfall is. So this image is 900 bytes, 400 bytes compressed. You can put this right in your HTML. This will load right away. And then when this 200 kilobyte image loads, it just pops and replaces the background image. And so I built a sample website. It was 200 kilobytes, took 4 seconds to load, and then when I don't load the images below the fold, it speeds up. It's twice as fast. You can see when I use preview images, it's about the same speed, a few more bytes, 2 kilobytes more because I added all of those SVG files. So I've started off, I've talked about 4 of these different optimizations, and I've always wanted to build a Venn diagram like this, so I decided to build one and put it in my talk. But what we see is 29% of the top 500,000 websites fail all 4 of these, right? So a full 30% of the web has a lot of improvement that can be done. You add another 30% that have done one optimization, but the sweet spot is sort of here. 8% of the web is successfully doing all 4 optimizations. Another 8% is doing 3 of the 4. Those websites are going to be much more optimized than the ones around the outside, and definitely better than the 30% that are doing none of them. So those are 4 really good optimizations that will radically speed up delivery of images. The next type of image I'd like to talk about are animated GIFs, because animated GIFs are kind of everywhere. And so this is a movie I took of my goat in Seattle. This is Nora the goat. And I took it on my phone. It's 1.4 megabytes. If my sound was on, you'd hear the sound, right? And I turned that into a GIF because we need more goats on the internet. And so it's looping, it's 256 colors because GIFs are from the 1980s, and as we all remember, there were only 256 colors in the 1980s. It's like my dad always told me that the world was black and white before there was color TV. Anyway. But if you actually look at the spec for GIF, they say we have an animated format. We don't recommend anyone uses it. And one of the reasons for that is this animated GIF is 300% larger than the movie that I took. And the reason for that is GIFs are actually, it's like a flip book of images. There's, depending on how many frames you have per second, that's how many discrete GIF images it's going to flip through, which isn't very good for compression. So actually the GIFs are bigger than the movies. And so if I could make the movie that I originally took and make it into 256 colors, strip out the audio track, right? Because we don't need an audio track for something that's looping that's not going to have any sound. I get it down to under 250 kilobytes. And I can use the video tag to play the goat video. And so I set it to loop, autoplay, and muted. You need muted on mobile Safari and mobile Chrome. And that's because when you're in a meeting and you're surfing the web, you don't want the videos to be loud because then people know you're surfing in a meeting. So that's like the meeting saver. And so videos won't play unless you have it set to muted. But that will actually make the video loop. The problem is video is always the last thing to load in a browser. And the reason it's last is because the browser knows that video files are big and they want the CSS and the JavaScript and the HTML and all that other stuff to load. So this may delay that thing, that image, that goat's being delivered to your web page. However, image tags are fast, and in Safari today, you can actually put a movie file in the picture tag, and it will play. And so what's great about this is this picture tag right here. If you're on Safari, so an Apple product, it will load the 250 kilobyte version of the goats and loop it, whereas the animated WebP, so Chrome and Google, that's 3 megabytes. That's going to take longer. And then finally, everyone who doesn't support either of those gets the 3.8 megabyte file that's going to take a longer time to download. So obviously, 250 kilobytes versus 3 megabytes, it's a huge win for those users because they support the movie tag inside the picture tag. And you can actually see that I tested it on a mobile device. You can see 22 seconds all the way down to 4 seconds. So it's a huge savings. 3.8 megabytes down to 250 kilobytes. Really, really big savings. And so, in conclusion, I talked a little bit about how to test web pages that have, using web page test, HTTP archive, lighthouses built into those so you can see how your website is doing with these different tests. Here are some of the tools I use to optimize the images. And then I talked a little bit about Cloudinary, which is a cool cloud-based tool. So in conclusion, your images and your video can be beautiful. It can be fast at the same time. So you can deliver great content quickly to your users if you optimize it. And then if we want to, we can do a little workshop. I've got something put together where we can speed up a slow web page. And Cloudinary offered to put together a contest. So if you take the web page that I've built that's super slow, when I load it in the web page test, it takes 19 seconds to load on a desktop, right? It's super slow. And it's all because I have 11 megabytes of images. And so what you can do is you can optimize this page, and we can walk through that. And then you submit it, and the fastest website will get €100 Amazon gift cards. So we can do that a little. We can sit around and talk about that later. We can walk through it. And I got this page down to 0.2 seconds on the desktop, so you can really optimize it. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions and chat more about images if you'd like. Yeah.
So have you ever integrated all of these tools and optimizations into a CI/CD tool chain so that you can keep track of all performances of your websites through time and see
how things have done as I've done the performance improvements?
Yeah.
So I've never done it through CI/CD specifically, but I've used Speed Curve, it uses web page tests as well to run synthetic tests of your page. And as I've done each one of them, I've run the test and watched it get faster. And it actually shows me, because it's based on web page tests, it shows me a lot of the optimizations that can be done as I go through it. So I have seen those optimizations go in and definitely speed up the delivery of web content.
So what's the name of the tool again?
Speed Curve, it's a synthetic testing. So you set it to test every day, and it'll give you reports when your web page speeds up. You can set performance budgets and things for how fast your page goes. So yes, but you can also, there are tools that as you add images into your content management system that will do these optimizations for you. Like I've shown some discrete tools that I do, as one-offs. Obviously, a tool like Cloudinary you could put into your system to run, but there are other tools that as you put an image, as soon as it gets uploaded to your server, it does the quality optimization, the resizing of the images, building the different formats.
I was more interested into tracking over time.
Tracking over time, yeah. I don't have a good chart of that right now, but definitely it's good for everything though. It's not just images, it'll track the speed of everything loading. So if you go in and you do a CSS audit and you clean up the CSS, that will show that speed up as well. Or if you decide to put in 16 new libraries, you'll see it get a lot slower.
So actually, you talked about Cloudinary.
Yeah.
Would you recommend or suggest any other CDN for images?
So they use a CDN, so they're more than just the CDN.
Okay.
So when you do the optimizations with Cloudinary, it gets put out on Akamai or Fastly or whichever CDN you want to use. But they do the optimizations. And so there are a number of different tools. And these are ones that you can integrate into your system. You know, you can use Image Magic to change them on the fly as you upload them into your system. This is just a great, of the cloud-based tools, this is probably the best one that I've used. There are a couple other ones out there as well, but that one, it's the most fully featured, I would say, and pretty quick. So you can do, it doesn't like the commas in the URLs, but if I, whoops. What did I missed the H. Thank you. Live demos. Right, so this one isn't, if I take out the sepia, this one won't be, so it's going to go back to Cloudinary and build a new image. So it was pretty quick to download that. And you can just change these numbers just on the fly. So 496, we can assume that, you know, 1390 isn't in there. Well, not for, that would be huge. Right, it's just generating them on the fly. So that's pretty fun. Cool. Awesome. So, you know, I'll be around if you guys want to do, I know we talked about doing a workshop. If we'd like to do that in a little bit, we could walk through, if you guys are interested, the different steps to optimize the web page that I've built, and maybe just take a couple-minute break, and then we can work on that. Okay, cool. Awesome. Thank you. Yeah.
Which one would be better to use, for example, for managing the website, or would you just recommend to upload it to Cloudinary and then let it do it everything?
What's actually pretty, you know, so these are the different images, right? So PNGs can be smaller, but that might just be the images that are on the web that are using PNG, right? I would say, I mean, browsers are going to support JPEG, PNG. I think JPEG in general gets you better compression than PNG.
With JPG.
Yeah. And they're